A stunning discovery in Greenland has unearthed a relic of Cold War history, hidden for more than 50 years beneath the ice. In April, NASA researchers were conducting an aerial survey of Greenland's ice sheet when their radar picked up something unusual: turquoise dots amid the icy expanse. These dots turned out to be remnants of Camp Century, a Cold War military project.
Hidden beneath Greenland's ice in 1959, the United States built a nuclear-powered city. Officially, it was a science station, but off the record, it was a plan to hide hundreds of missiles beneath the Arctic ice. Today, melting ice is revealing something no Cold War general predicted. Ancient viruses, preserved for nearly 50,000 years, are waking up alongside diesel, radioactive coolant, and other toxic waste. What happens when humanity's buried secrets and the planet's oldest threats emerge at the same time? The real story begins with Camp Century. In June 1959, a convoy of U.S. Army engineers rolled onto the endless white of northwest Greenland, hauling crates of steel, timber, and a secret no one outside the Pentagon could imagine. They set to work carving a city beneath the ice, one that would vanish from the surface in weeks, hidden under drifting snow and sub-zero winds. The plan was audacious. A grid of tunnels stretching nearly 2 miles, all cut through ancient ice, with the nearest outpost over 150 miles away. At its heart, they installed the PM-2A nuclear reactor, a compact powerhouse that would run for almost 3 years without refueling. This single machine replaced 1 million gallons of diesel, supplying the city with enough electricity for heated barracks, a hospital, a kitchen serving hot meals, even a chapel and a barber shop. Inside these tunnels, life played out in a world of constant daylight and unbroken silence. Soldiers and scientists bunked in prefabricated dorms, each room barely bigger than a closet, but warm enough to fight off the minus 70 degrees cold outside. The mess hall echoed with the scrape of metal trays, while the laundry steamed with water drawn from a well that tapped ice thousands of years old. A recreation hall offered movies and cards, a rare escape from the monotony of white walls and humming generators. Down one corridor, the communications center buzzed with radio traffic, linking Camp Century to the outside world through layers of ice and static. To outsiders, Camp Century looked like a triumph of American ingenuity, a scientific outpost pushing the limits of what humans could build in the most unforgiving place on Earth. Newspapers ran photos of smiling engineers in parkas, boasting of ice core drills and polar research. The Army Polar Research and Development Center sent back data on snow chemistry and glacial movement, laying the groundwork for studies that would shape climate science decades later. But beneath the surface, the city's true purpose was hidden in plain sight. The grid of tunnels, the power-hungry reactor, the relentless pace of construction, none of it made sense for a mere research station. The real story, sealed behind classified orders and coded cables, was far bigger than science. For now, though, Camp Century stood as proof that the ice could be tamed, its secrets locked away by human hands and nuclear fire. Beneath the frozen crust of Greenland, Camp Century was never just a city of science. In the Pentagon's back rooms, its blueprints stretched far beyond research. The real ambition was Project Iceworm, a hidden arsenal of 600 nuclear missiles, each one sealed in its own icy corridor, ready to strike without warning. Army engineers mapped out a lattice of launch tunnels, an underground grid spanning over 50,000 square miles, 3 times the size of Denmark. The plan called for missiles spaced miles apart, buried so deep in the ice that even the most determined enemy would see only endless white. Command centers would be scattered throughout the labyrinth, connected by rails and radio, every inch invisible to satellites and spies. The secret was bigger than anyone imagined, but what looked perfect on paper began to unravel as soon as the digging started. The ice sheet was alive, moving under its own slow, relentless force. Instead of solid ground, the engineers found a shifting sea of ancient snow, compressed over millennia. Walls that stood straight 1 week began to bow and buckle the next. Steel arches groaned under the pressure, and wooden beams snapped in the night. Tunnel floors heaved upward, pinching doors shut and warping the rails meant for missile transport. Every month, crews hauled out tons of crushed snow, fighting a battle they could never win. The ice would not be tamed. Declassified documents from the early 1960s reveal the growing alarm. Reports describe tunnels deforming within months, not decades. Measurements showed the ice flowing faster than anyone had predicted, squeezing the city from all sides. The reactor's waste heat only made things worse, melting pockets in the ice and speeding the collapse. By 1963, Army planners quietly canceled Iceworm, admitting that the Greenland ice sheet could not be mastered. The tunnels were warping too quickly for any missile system to remain operational. The city that was supposed to last forever began to close in on itself, each corridor a shrinking coffin of steel and snow. The alarm had been raised too late. For the men stationed inside, the sense of control slipped away. Routine gave way to dread as ceilings sagged and support beams twisted out of shape. The dream of an invulnerable missile fortress dissolved into a daily struggle against a landscape that refused to be mastered. By 1967, Camp Century was abandoned, its grand designs buried under the same ice that had promised secrecy and safety. The files were stamped canceled, and the world moved on, unaware of the arsenal that never was and the warning that came with it. Where engineers saw a fortress, the ice saw only a brief disturbance, soon to be swallowed and forgotten. The secret city faded into myth, but the ice kept moving, indifferent to human plans, abandoned and still not quiet. When the last engineers boarded their transport out of Camp Century, they left behind more than empty tunnels and broken dreams. Buried in the ice, a silent inventory waited. More than 200,000 liters of diesel fuel remained, pooled in tanks and pipes, enough to power a small town for months. Alongside it, 240,000 liters of untreated wastewater, sewage, kitchen runoff, and chemical cleaners soaked into trenches and sumps carved into the ice. The insulation panels and electrical equipment built for Cold War durability were loaded with polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. These chemicals, once prized for their stability, are now banned worldwide for their toxicity and ability to accumulate in the food chain. Somewhere deeper in the ice, the legacy of the nuclear reactor lingered. Nearly 47,000 gallons of radioactive coolant water left behind after the PM-2A reactor was hauled away. No one kept precise maps of where every drum or sump was buried. The waste spread across a site the size of a city park, scattered in pits and crawl spaces now pressed under tens of meters of ice. The men who signed off on the evacuation believed the ice would entomb everything forever. Greenland's ice sheet, 2 miles thick in places, seemed eternal, too cold, too vast to ever give up its secrets. The idea that diesel could seep into meltwater or that PCBs might one day find their way into the ocean was dismissed as impossible. For decades, the world forgot about the toxic depot sealed under the snow. But the inventory did not disappear. It only waited. As the ice above Camp Century thins and melts, the scale of contamination becomes impossible to ignore. Each year, satellite scans and ice cores reveal the site is creeping closer to the surface. Scientists now estimate that by the end of the century, as much as half of the buried waste could be exposed, carried by meltwater through hidden channels and out to sea. What was meant to be a fortress became a time capsule, packed not with relics, but with poisons. The ice, once a shield, now threatens to release a chemical brew into the Arctic ecosystem. Diesel, PCBs, radioactive water, each a hazard on its own, together form a toxic legacy that no one planned for and no one can easily retrieve. The true cost of Camp Century is measured not just in dollars or Cold War bravado, but in the slow, silent seep of pollution that may haunt the Arctic for generations. Waste buried beneath Camp Century is no longer frozen in place. As global temperatures climb, the Greenland ice sheet is thinning at a rate that would have stunned the men who left the base behind. The ice, once thought to be a permanent vault, is now shifting from a barrier to a conveyor. Each summer, meltwater trickles down through porous layers known as firn, old snow that is not yet solid ice, creating hidden channels that snake toward the coast. These channels do more than move water. They mobilize everything trapped inside, dissolving diesel, PCBs, and radioactive residue, and carrying them out of their icy tomb. William Colgan, a leading glaciologist, has spent years modeling what happens next. According to his Team S projections, the transition from snowfall to net melt at Camp Century could arrive as early as 2090. That is the moment the balance tips. Instead of new snow burying the waste deeper, meltwater starts drawing it upward. The site, once buried under more than 30 meters of ice, will become exposed to the surface in the open air. From there, toxins will seep into meltwater streams, running through the Firn and out to the Arctic Ocean. Colgan warns that the planners thought it would never be exposed, but the ice is thinning faster than almost any climate model predicted a generation ago. This process is not a slow leak. Firn acts like a sponge with veins, soaking up meltwater and flushing it through the ice sheet's hidden plumbing. Once the waste hits this moving water, it can travel miles in a single melt season. PCBs, designed never to break down, will accumulate in plankton and fish, rising up the food web to seals and polar bears. Radioactive isotopes and diesel residues will follow the same paths, invisible but persistent, entering the North Atlantic in pulses tied to each year S thaw. The models are precise enough to set a clock. By the end of this century, 30 to 50% of Camp Century S waste could be released. Satellite scans and borehole samples confirm the ice above the base is thinning by centimeters each year, shrinking the distance between the buried depot and the world outside. Remediation is a logistical nightmare. Excavating even a small portion would require heavy equipment, airlifts, and billions of dollars. For now, the only defense is monitoring, radar, seismic sensors, and chemical tracers, all tracking the slow countdown to exposure. The chemistry of the ice, once a shield, is now a fuse. The clock is running, and the release is inevitable. In a laboratory in Marseille, a glass vial thawed under fluorescent light. Inside, a sliver of Siberian permafrost frozen since mammoths roamed the tundra began to release something unseen. Jean-Michel Claverie, a virologist known for chasing the world's strangest microbes, watched as the sample warmed. Radiocarbon dating had pinned its age at nearly 48,500 years. No one expected what happened next. The ice, once a perfect vault, had preserved a virus so large it could be seen with a simple light microscope. This was no ordinary microbe. The Pandora virus, as Claverie S team named it, dwarfed the viruses that cause influenza or HIV. Its genome carried more than 2,000 genes, hundreds of times more than most viruses, hinting at ancient powers lost to modern biology. To test if the virus was still alive, researchers introduced it to a culture of amoebas, single-celled organisms that drift through soil and water. Under the microscope, the first signs were subtle, a twitch, a change in shape. Then the amoebas began to sicken and burst. The virus, dormant for almost 50 millennia, was infectious the moment it woke. What had been frozen since before the first pyramids were built now moved and multiplied in a petri dish. Claverie S experiment. Shattered assumptions about the limits of life. If a giant virus could survive tens of thousands of years in deep freeze, what else might be waiting in the thawing ground? The proof was no longer theoretical. The laboratory revival showed that ancient pathogens are not just relics. They can return, infectious and unpredictable. The line between past and present blurred, and the idea of permafrost as a safe, silent graveyard began to crumble. In the cold light of the lab, the story of the ice was no longer just about what humans had buried, but what nature had hidden for an eternity. In July 2016, a heat wave swept across Siberia's Yamal Peninsula, pushing ground temperatures to levels not seen in decades. Deep in the tundra, permafrost that had locked away secrets since World War II began to thaw. What surfaced was a reindeer carcass, buried since the 1940s, its flesh still carrying the dormant spores of anthrax. Within days, the invisible threat became real. The spores reactivated, spreading through water and soil, infecting herds that grazed nearby. Over 2,300 reindeer died in a matter of weeks. human cases followed. At least 36 people were hospitalized, and a 12-year-old boy lost his life after eating contaminated meat. Russian authorities scrambled to vaccinate tens of thousands of reindeer and imposed a quarantine, but the outbreak was a warning no one could ignore. This was not a random act of nature. The permafrost had been disturbed not just by heat, but by human activity. Heavy equipment used for oil and gas drilling on the Yamal Peninsula cuts deep into the frozen ground, reaching depths of 20 meters, sometimes 50 meters, far below the active layer that thaws each summer. Mining operations across the Arctic, from Siberia to Greenland, strip away protective layers of Earth, exposing ancient soils and anything preserved within them. Scientific studies show that the deeper these machines dig, the greater the risk of unearthing pathogens that have lain dormant for millennia. In the rush for resources, the ground is being opened faster than climate alone could manage. Immunologist Dr. Annika Sigurdsson has spent years studying how modern immune systems respond to ancient threats. Her findings are blunt. Humans have no natural defenses against pathogens from the Pleistocene. The 2016 anthrax outbreak was not an isolated event, but a glimpse of what happens when the past collides with the present. As industrial ambitions push further into the Arctic, the gap in our immunity looms larger. The Earth is giving up its dead, and we are more exposed than we have ever been. The question is no longer if ancient diseases will return, but whether we are prepared for what is coming. Right now, Greenland's melting ice is not just exposing Cold War debris, it is unlocking organisms unseen for over 40,000 years. As industry pushes deeper into thawing permafrost, we risk unsealing biological threats. Our immune systems have never faced. The real danger is not what we buried, but what we are waking up. Some secrets, once thawed, cannot be put back on ice. Share your thoughts below.